The next coach on our Zoom is Penn State's James Franklin. Coach Franklin led the Nittany Lions to their second Big Ten football championship game appearance. Penn State finished the season 11-1 overall and 8-1 in conference play. And the Nittany Lions are looking for their fifth Big Ten championship. Coach, if you wouldn't mind giving some quick opening comments, and then we'll open the call for media questions.
Yeah, just excited about the opportunity, obviously, to represent Penn State and our fans and our lettermen, and come to Indianapolis and have a chance to compete against a unbelievable opponent in Oregon. And Coach Lanning has done a great job there. And we're excited about the opportunity. So a lot of work to do this week. We're in here today, obviously making corrections from last week and getting a head start on Oregon, but looking forward to the opportunity to compete.
Thank you, Coach. We'll go ahead and take questions from the media. Rich, you can go for first.
Hi, James.
Hey,
When
Rich.
when you see Oregon play, or when you've seen Oregon play, what impresses you about their front seven on defense?
Yeah, as you can imagine, Rich, this is early in the process. At this stage, we've really just started to watch them have cleaned up our game from this past weekend against Maryland, and have just started to study Oregon. So at this stage, I know they've obviously done a really good job of team defense. I know they've been disruptive up front, but for me to get into the details with you right now, I don't feel in position to do that yet, Rich.
Greg, we can go to you.
Hey, Coach, how are you?
Good, Greg. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Just curious if there's anything you can share with us about Trey being able to warm up yesterday, Trey Wallace, but not playing. And then just in general, your receivers, how you felt they played yesterday throughout the course of that game, both when you had the ones in and then when you had the threes and fours in later in the game.
Yeah, I was pleased with the wide receivers overall. I keep pushing each week to make sure that we're continuing to get those guys as many opportunities as possible. It's going to be really important for us, as the season goes on. So that position and the development of that position and the production of that position is been priority number one, really, all off season and all season. So overall, pleased. Um, Trey, tweaked something during the week, and was not able to go, but we are hopeful, that he'll be able to go this week. But too early in the week to really tell, but was unable to go this past week.
Tyler, we'll go to you next.
Thank you. Hi, James. Hope you're well.
Good. You too, Tyler.
Been 8 years since you had a game kind of thrown your way that you earned, that you had this limited time to prepare for. Relatively speaking, how does this game week need to look different for you guys, versus games that you've known you were going to have for months or maybe years at a time in advance?
Yeah, nothing has really changed. I mean, we're going to follow our normal week prep. There's sometimes when you have a bye week or you got a game that you're planning for ahead of time that you get a little bit of extra work on. But for us, we stay pretty dialed in on the task at hand. Have some staff that late in the week can work ahead. Obviously, we weren't able to do that this week, but we're just kind of turning the page right now and moving on to Oregon. But not a whole lot will change except for like the normal adjustments you make late in the season, where you're trying to do as much as you possibly can to have the guys ready to play, but also making some adjustments and some modifications, as the season goes on, to make sure that we're as fresh and as healthy as possible.
Kyle, we can go to you.
James, I talked with Dan in the previous session about the battle in the trenches. Oregon might have the best defensive line you will see all year with Uagalele and Birch. You have some injuries on your offensive line. So two-part question. How do you approach this matchup where they have a very athletic and freakish defensive line that can do very exotic things? And two, how do you assess throughout your time at Penn State, how has the trench game been built up under Coach Troutwine?
Yeah, so again, at this stage, I don't have the time, haven't had the time to watch Oregon thoroughly enough to have strong opinions, but obviously I know how they've recruited and I know how they've developed, and I look at statistically where they're at, and I've seen a little bit of game film on them, but I think, Dan comes from a similar background that I come from, and the belief that you start up front, you got to win football games up front on the O line and D line. They've done a good job of that, and that's going to be important. Coach Troutwine's done a really good job since he's been with us. We've gotten better every single year. We do have some moving parts this year with some injuries. Not ideal, but that'll be a major focus this week and moving forward. And then also there's things that we're going to have to do in terms of how you call the game to be able to help those guys too. So a lot of things kind of go into it. We have a lot of confidence in our O linemen and how they're going to play, but there's also some things that you need to do schematically to put them in an advantageous position too.
Zachary, you can go ahead.
Hey, Coach. Oregon is kind of the new kid on the block, so to speak, in the Big Ten this year. Obviously, as an established Big Ten member, what does it kind of say to you for them to be able to go undefeated in the conference? And what does that say to you about the coaching staff?
Yeah, as we know, Oregon's been doing a good job for a long time now. Under a number of different coaches, and Dan's taken it to the next level. They've done a phenomenal job. It's also a place with tremendous resources as well, and they've built that thing, to compete at the highest level. And I got some pretty strong relationships with Oregon and have for a long time, not only on the coaching staff but in other areas as well. And they're committed to win at the highest level and have been that way for a number of years now. So Dan and his staff have done a phenomenal job. But just like all of us, it takes a major commitment from everybody involved, and they've done a very nice job of that. I think also Dan's background and experience in the SEC, I think also helps. I think he's able to kind of bring together, two different worlds, and the experiences he's learned from both. So very valuable.
Kyle, you can go ahead.
Hey, Coach Kyle with Sports Report. Hey, talk about the history and tradition of Penn State and you being in the championship game of the Big Ten and what this means to Penn State.
Yeah, Kyle. I mean, obviously that's what we're all trying to do, is to compete for championships. And the first thing is at the conference level. And then at the second level is obviously, from a national championship standpoint. And more times than not, you have to do one before you can do the other. So, our guys are excited about it. I know I'm excited about it, so is the staff. It'll be a real challenge. We're excited about playing in Indianapolis. It'll be a great environment. We've been there before, and we're expecting our fans to travel well. And obviously we got a tremendous opponent, number one ranked team in the country that's been in that position for a number of weeks now, and has shown consistently that they're deserving of that ranking.
Tyler, you can go ahead.
Thank you. James, I asked about this last week, but we got another sample size added to it with Nick Singleton. How would you describe the way he managed to finish this regular season? And when he's playing at this level right now, does it allow Andy Kotelnicki to maybe do some things that weren't on the table at midseason because of how Nick was?
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I do think your point is a good one, and it's pretty obvious that Nick is back. As close to 100% as he's been in a long time. And you see the burst and the acceleration on tape. But yeah, we're going to try to be creative each week with our guys and put them in the best position to be successful. And there's some things that Nick does really well, and there's some things that Katron does really well, and possibly tagging some more of those plays for those guys so that we can put them in the best position possible, but not do it to the degree that it creates tendencies and giveaways in terms of how we're using each guy. So got to be strategic about it. But obviously a healthy Nick Singleton, is a positive for our team and for our offense.
Mark, you can go ahead.
Hi, James. Thanks for your time.
You too, Mark.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago about having developed some relationships at Oregon. How have you gone about doing that over your coaching career, and what kind of relationships do you have there?
Yeah, probably won't get into those specifics right now, but as you can imagine, there's a ton of relationships that you form over time in this industry. I've been in this industry now, for over 30 years. Um, I've worked with people that now work at Maryland at previous stops. And I've been fortunate to be a part of other things that have allowed me to have interactions with people on their staff, with people in their administration, and people that are very influential at Oregon. So I understand very clearly what their commitment level is like. We've also done a ton of, as you guys know, we do a ton of studies on other programs in terms of facilities, in terms of resources, whether it's NIL or budgets in general. All those things are really important when you're trying to build your program to compete at the highest level. Understanding who and what you're competing against is a big part of that. So, a ton of conversations and a ton of resources, help with those things.
Greg, you can go ahead.
Coach, can you give us some insight on, in terms of your last 15 hours, how your plan for this week has changed, both with signing day and, of course, preparing for a game while also waiting for the portal opening on Monday?
Yeah, it's changed dramatically. I mean, I went into the locker room after the game, and I told them I got good news and bad news. We were supposed to have Sunday off as a staff and players, and now we're practicing and working, and it'll be a long day. And that's a positive. That's obviously a positive. So, our guys are excited about it, but a very different, obviously a very different, week. It was going to be a week for rest and recovery, some strategic practices. But obviously we always have to be prepared for all these different scenarios, and we were. So right after the game, I told them, hey, we're ready to go. We're practicing on Sunday. They didn't even know that we had Sunday off yet. But that was the plan. So right after the game, I let them know what the schedule was going to be like, and it's back to a normal week schedule for us, an in-season schedule. And our coaches and players are ready to go, and obviously, as you can imagine, pretty excited about it. And then in terms of signing day, I'd probably say one of the biggest differences for signing day is that I'll be involved with signing day with the recruiting staff, but none of the assistants will. Typically, we've all been involved, but with this being in season, that's going to be hard to pull off. So I'll step away, from game planning for, maybe an hour or so, to welcome the recruits and their families into our family. But that's really about it.
Jack, you can go ahead.
Hi, Coach. Thanks for your time. You're going to be Penn State is going to be the first team to play all four of the Pac-12 newcomers. And there's kind of people talk about the Pac-12 style of football. Have you noticed anything between Washington, UCLA, and USC that you kind of piece together as similarities coming from the same conference?
Yeah, I would say obviously there's some similar characteristics. But I would also say that I think a lot of those programs and a lot of those coaches, studied the Big Ten, but also studied the SEC and said, how do our programs and how do our rosters look different, than the Big Ten and the SEC, and what modifications do we have to make to close the gap? And I think really all these programs have done that, So it's interesting you bring that up, because as we all know, scheduling is a big part of all these things, and we're excited about the opportunity being able to play Washington, to your point, USC, UCLA, and now Oregon. So we've had pretty good experience on it, but I would say the biggest thing is I think most of these programs, from what I've seen, read, saw, studied, they've spent a lot of times of trying to, change their rosters to make them a little bit more Big Ten playoff ready, and that's what I've noticed.
Thanks, Coach.
Shane, you can go ahead.
Hey, Coach, how are you?
Good, Shane. How are you?
Doing well. Talked to Jalen Reed after the game yesterday. He said he would basically rate the defensive effort as a 10 out of 10. Given the pressure you guys were able to generate against Maryland and also the turnovers you've created over the last two games, how do you feel like your defense is trending as far as the things you wanted before Minnesota and kind of the level of disruption you've been able to create here?
Yeah, I think, getting Deny back healthy, I think that's been important. And I think this was his first game back where he was really healthy. Abdul, the second half of the season, has gotten very comfortable at playing defensive end. We've been able to rotate and get production out of guys like Amin as well. So I think all those things have been really important. And I think last week was a really good example of that, except for the opening drive. Our defense played at a high level and was disruptive. We challenged them about turnovers. In the last couple of weeks, we've done a really good job of that. So we're going to have to continue building on that moving forward as a major part of our defensive identity. But overall, good. And, as you know, and just like the caller, a few calls back mentioned, being disruptive up front is really important. And that's on offense and defense, being able to find ways to change the line of scrimmage and either create space or reduce space, which is what offense and defensive football is all about.
Joel, you can go ahead.
Hey, James, thanks for doing this. To follow up on an earlier question, you said you kind of evaluate some of the other schools in terms of their NIL and their facilities and things like that. What is your evaluation of where Oregon stands, and how do you think Penn State compares to that?
Yeah, I don't want to get into a whole lot of that right now. Talking about other people's business and what we know. I don't want to get into a whole lot of that, but I think it's pretty obvious when you look at programs in general, whether it's Penn State, whether it's Oregon, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, whoever it may be. There's a lot of information that is out there that I think paints a pretty clear picture on commitment, and whether that is the budget of the staffs, whether that is the budget of the program, whether that is revenue that is being brought in, whether that is facilities, which is pretty easy to research and see, and then obviously the commitment, from the top. And that is, whether it's board members, president of the university, athletic director, and the programs that are able to compete on a consistent basis, there's alignment. And I think you see examples of that across the country that are strong and consistent and have been for a long time. And typically their football records and football success indicate that. And then there's other places where that fluctuates and it's not as consistent. Um, and you notice that as well. So as long as you're willing to spend the time and kind of look at it and study it and ask enough questions and have enough resources that has credible information, you can see it pretty clearly, where you're at and where you need to be.
Greg, you can go ahead.
Coach, I can only get as far back on as 2019 online, but based on your 2019 staff directory, I think you guys had a handful of analysts that year. So looking back to 2016, I'm guessing it was probably similar or maybe even less. How does preparing for this Big Ten title game change based on the number of other staffers you have in the program now compared to back then in 2016?
Yeah, it changes, but again, it's all relative, right? Like everybody's roster, their staff size has changed. So yeah, is there more horsepower and more manpower in terms of projects and getting things done? Yes. Time also factors into that. So, were you able to get a head start or not? All those things factor in, but just like your manpower and horsepower have gone up, so is everybody else's. So is it different? Yeah, it's different. And we got a bunch of really talented people in the building with unique backgrounds and perspectives. And by this point of the season, I think we're in a pretty good, you know, phase in terms of how we operate and how we can be as efficient as possible, with our time and with our preparation. So I think we're in a good place, and I've been very pleased with the staff all year long in terms of how we've approached things and prepared.
Tyler, you can go ahead.
Thanks, James. Just to follow up on Nolan Rucci, I know you got some questions on him last week, but with another game under his belt, another start under his belt, what's the confidence level and what he's doing at right tackle moving into the postseason, and what did he maybe show you and the staff through the work on Saturday?
Yeah, we thought he had a a really good game this past week. Typically for offensive linemen, if you're not talking about them, that's a good thing. Um, and there wasn't a whole lot of conversation about it during the game, and then afterwards, I think he graded as one of our players of the game. So very pleased with him, very confident in him. He's kind of steady Eddie in terms of his approach and his demeanor. And I think he's just going to continue to get better as the year goes on. Obviously, this is going to be a big challenge this week, based on their front seven, but I know he'll do everything in his power to prepare the right way.
James, we'll go to you next.
Do you have any good anecdotes of Joe Lorig's tenure with you, and what insights do you think he still has on you guys when the coordinators have changed since he worked for you, and insights you guys might have on their special teams because of your knowledge of his coaching tactic?
Yeah, it's probably similar, right? I know Joe and Joe knows me, but like you mentioned, the coordinators have all changed. So I think, we both, have a probably similar amount of information on each other. Me and Joe go way back. We were roommates at Idaho State in Pocatello, Idaho. And when I had an opportunity to hire him and bring him to Penn State, really worked out well, did a great job for us. Very, very knowledgeable guy, very respected guy. Obviously with Joe being from Oregon and him and Dan having a previous relationship, the opportunity for him to go back home, be closer to family, and work with a guy that he had a pre-existing relationship, I think from when they were at Memphis together, if I remember correctly. But Joe's a great guy. And again, like I mentioned, I've worked with him, but also lived with him. We were roommates. So excited to see him, on Saturday and to compete against him.
Nick, we'll go to you.
Hey, Coach. Thank you for doing this. I wanted to ask you just about what have you seen over the course of the season and the development of Tyler Warren, obviously 130 career receptions. Just what have you seen overall from this young man that's helped make your offense that much more potent?
Yeah, he just continues to get better, in every area as a blocker, which we're still big believers that the tight ends should be doing that as part of their job description, which isn't always the case. Uh, we've used him as a wildcat quarterback for a number of years now, but that package has expanded as he's grown. Um, Obviously we've used him as a wide receiver as well in terms of lining him out wide or in the slot or whatever it may be. Very confident, very consistent players, got unique ball skills and body control for a big human being, and is having a phenomenal year. In terms of our offense, obviously a big part of it goes through him, but we also recognize that everybody we play defensively also says that one of their big goals is to limit his impact. Hasn't happened a whole lot yet because it's hard to do when you play a tight end the way we do and line them up as a traditional tight end, as a tight end in the hip position, in the backfield as a fullback, in the slot as a slot receiver, out wide as a number one wide receiver, and then also motions and shifts. So it just makes it difficult to say we're going to take this guy out of the game, based on defensive scheme. It just makes it very difficult to do to still keep your defense sound while also eliminating a receiver that can line up in so many different spots. So he's had a huge year for us. He's the model just in terms of how he's handled all of this with such humility. Really proud of him.
Thank you, Coach.
Seth, we'll go to you.
Hey, James.
Hey, Seth.
Wanted to ask about Dewan Lane. We saw him have his first career pick last night. What have you seen from his development over the course of the year? And second, just how pleased are you with the overall development of this year's freshman class?
Yeah, a guy, as you know, since we decided to play him and burn his red shirt, we had a lot of confidence in him. Very talented, big, strong, fast, athletic guy. We had a lot of conversations about him possibly could play wide receiver. And as the season's gone on, his role on special teams has grown, and as the season goes on, his role on defense has grown. As you can see, the play that he made there, he also had an opportunity for a block punt, which would have been huge if he'd have been able to have both of those, so he can continue to grow his confidence and also be able to impact our team. But I think him, as well as a lot of the freshmen that either have played full time, like Luke and Cooper, or guys that we've played in the 4 games and tried to redshirt, but still have gotten a decent amount of football in. And now that we're in postseason, now those guys are full go and can play in everything. So whether it's Max or whether it's Harvey at defensive end, or whether it's John Mitchell or Belgrave Shorter or Woosley in the secondary, Vabu, ton of guys, that are doing things. Specca doing some really good things this past week on special teams. And then the young running backs. So been a bunch of different guys. Tyseer, at wide receiver. I think there's been a really good foundation laid with those guys that we can build on, through the postseason and going in the next year.
James, we'll go to you for the final question.
There's been a lot of conjecture and opinions about the value of the conference title game and the first round bye to the Rose Bowl versus being a 5 or a 6 seed hosting a playoff game, and perceptions about who has the easier path, whether winning gives you an easier path or being the 5 seed and perhaps a more favorable matchup. What's your perspective on what the committee should do in terms of creating the most favorable paths for teams who win conference title games and for those who get to host playoff games if they lose these title games?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is two things. Number one, I'm focused on the things that I can control, which is being prepared to play Oregon and play Oregon well. Um, and then those other things are outside of my control. I think everybody recognizes that we want to make sure that these playoff games do not become a penalty. And I think there's been a lot of conversation about that. And there's a bunch of really good football people that are on the committee that I think understand that. But besides that, at this time, I don't have a whole lot of questions or concern because I'm just totally focused on putting our team in the best position to beat Oregon. That's really what our focus is on. So all those other things, I'll leave those things up to the commissioners. I'll leave those things up to the college football committee, playoff committee. Um, and I think everybody has the same goal in mind, right? Doing what's best for college football and the student athletes, and getting the best 12 teams in the game and trying to set it up in a way um, that you earn the right to where you're seated throughout the entire season and the collective body of work. So we'll see how that plays out. What I do know is no matter what happens and whatever's decided, some people won't be happy about it, but I'm just focused on beating Oregon.
Coach, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in Indianapolis.
Thanks, guys.